Daniel had everything designed to save him time. But one morning he realized he could not remember what he was doing with all the time he had saved. Daniel Carter lived the kind of life many people dreamed about. At 34 years old, he had a successful career in New York City, a comfortable apartment overlooking the busy streets, and a schedule that seemed perfectly organized. Every part of his day was built around efficiency. His coffee arrived before he finished getting dressed. His groceries appeared at his door with a few taps on his phone. His calendar reminded him where to be, what to do, and when to do it. Daniel believed he had discovered the secret to modern life. Why spend an hour doing something when technology could help him finish it in minutes? To him, convenience was freedom. Every shortcut gave him more control. Every automated service gave him more time. He was proud of how much he had optimized his life. His friends often joked that Daniel was always one step ahead because he had a solution for everything. Need dinner? There was an app. Need a ride? There was a button. Need information? There was an answer within seconds. Daniel rarely waited for anything anymore. And he loved it. But slowly, something strange began to happen. The easier his life became, the less he seemed to notice the world around him. He no longer walked through his neighborhood just to explore. He no longer visited local stores where he used to have small conversations with familiar faces. He no longer spent time learning things the slow way because there was always a faster option available. At first, Daniel did not see this as a problem. He thought he was simply adapting to a better future. After all, saving time was supposed to improve life. Then one evening, after finishing another busy day filled with meetings and notifications, Daniel sat alone in his apartment and looked around. Everything was convenient. Everything was available. Everything was designed to make his life easier. Yet he found himself asking a question he had never considered before. Where did all that saved time actually go? The next day, Daniel met Sarah Mitchell during a community project near his neighborhood. Sarah was 32 years old and worked as an elementary school teacher. Unlike Daniel, she did not seem interested in making every moment faster. She enjoyed walking instead of always choosing the quickest route. She preferred preparing meals herself instead of ordering everything. She believed some experiences were valuable because they required patience. Daniel smiled when he heard her explain this. But why make things harder than they need to be? He asked. Sarah smiled back and answered, maybe the question is not whether something is easier. Maybe the question is what we lose when we make everything easier. Her words stayed in Daniel's mind longer than he expected. For the first time, he wondered if convenience was only giving him benefits, or if somewhere along the way it had quietly taken something from him. And that question would begin a journey that changed the way he saw time, technology, and what it truly means to live a better life. The next few days, Daniel Carter could not stop thinking about one simple question. What was he actually gaining from making everything faster? Before meeting Sarah Mitchell, he had never questioned the way he lived. Convenience had always felt like progress. Every new tool, every new service, every new shortcut seemed like another step toward a better future. But now, small moments from his daily routine started looking different. One morning, Daniel ordered breakfast from his phone while standing in his kitchen. The food arrived within minutes, just like always. But as he ate alone at his desk, he realized something unusual. He could not remember the last time he had sat in a restaurant and enjoyed a real conversation with someone. He could not remember the last time he discovered a new place by accident. His life was filled with solutions but fewer surprises. Daniel decided to pay closer attention. He started noticing how often he reached for convenience without even thinking. When he needed something, he searched immediately. When he felt bored, he looked for instant entertainment. When a task required effort, he searched for the fastest way around it. None of these choices seemed harmful by themselves. In fact, each one made perfect sense. The problem was that thousands of small choices were slowly changing the way he experienced life. During another conversation with Sarah, Daniel brought up his thoughts. I understand saving time, he said. But are you saying convenience is a bad thing? Sarah shook her head. No. Convenience is one of the greatest tools we have created. It can help people solve problems and give us opportunities. The question is not whether convenience is good or bad. The question is whether we are using it intentionally. Daniel listened carefully. He realized Sarah was not against technology. She was not asking people to return to the past or reject progress. She was asking a deeper question. If technology gave people more free time, how were they choosing to spend it? That question followed Daniel throughout the week. He noticed that many people around him were living the same way. They were always connected but often distracted. They had faster communication but fewer meaningful conversations. They had more entertainment but less patience for quiet moments. Daniel remembered when he was younger, before everything became instant. Waiting for something created anticipation. Learning something difficult created pride. Exploring somewhere new created memories. He began to wonder if some challenges were not problems to eliminate, but experiences that shaped people. One afternoon, Sarah invited Daniel to help with a local community event. First, Daniel hesitated. His schedule was already full, and he could think of many reasons why staying home would be easier. But he decided to go. The event was simple. People gathered, shared stories, prepared food, and worked together without trying to make everything perfect or efficient. Daniel noticed something unexpected. Nobody seemed worried about saving every minute. They were simply enjoying being present. For the first time in a long while, Daniel felt like he was experiencing time instead of managing it. As he walked home that evening, he thought about how strange it was. He had spent years trying to create more freedom, but perhaps he had forgotten what freedom was supposed to feel like. Convenience had made many parts of life easier. But maybe easier was not always the same as better. After the community event, Daniel Carter expected his old routine to return. He thought he would wake up the next morning, open his phone, check his schedule, and continue living the same efficient life he had built for himself. But something had changed. The experience stayed with him. It was not because the event was extraordinary. In fact, it was simple. People shared food. They talked without checking the time every few minutes. They worked together without searching for the fastest solution. Yet those small moments felt more meaningful than many of the perfectly organized days Daniel had created. He began paying attention to the difference between convenience and connection. Daniel started noticing how often modern life removed small opportunities for human interaction. A few taps could replace a conversation. A delivery service could replace a walk through the neighborhood. An automated response could replace a thoughtful message. None of these things were wrong. They were useful. They saved time. But Daniel began to understand that every convenience also changed something about the experience itself. One evening, Daniel met Sarah at a local coffee shop. Unlike his usual visits, he did not order ahead through an app. He stood in line, looked around, and listened to the conversations happening around him. It felt strangely unfamiliar. "You look like someone discovering a new world," Sarah joked when she saw him. Daniel laughed. "It is strange. I used to think waiting was just wasted time." Sarah smiled. "Sometimes waiting is where life happens." That sentence stayed with Daniel. He realized how many moments he had avoided simply because they were not efficient. He avoided waiting. He avoided difficulty. He avoided anything that required patience. But those were often the moments when people learned, connected, and remembered. Daniel began exploring a different way of using technology. He did not delete his apps or reject the tools that made his life easier. He still used online services for work. He still appreciated the convenience they provided. The difference was that he started making choices instead of automatically accepting the easiest option every time. He decided to cook a few meals each week instead of always ordering food. He walked short distances instead of immediately requesting transportation. He called friends instead of only sending quick messages. At first, these changes felt unnecessary. They took more effort. They required more time. But slowly, Daniel noticed something surprising. The extra effort was creating something valuable. Preparing a meal became a moment of creativity. Walking became a chance to clear his mind. Conversations became deeper because he was giving them more attention. Daniel began to see that the goal was never to remove all difficulty from life. Some challenges gave experiences their meaning. Some effort created appreciation. Some waiting created excitement. Sarah had never told him to abandon convenience. She had only encouraged him to ask a better question. Was he making life easier, or was he making life smaller? That question changed the way Daniel viewed the modern world. He realized convenience was not the enemy. The real danger was allowing convenience to decide everything for him. And as Daniel continued his experiment with a more intentional life, he started to discover that the moments requiring a little more effort were often the moments he remembered the most. For the first time in years, Daniel Carter was no longer trying to remove every inconvenience from his life. Instead, he was beginning to understand the difference between a problem and an experience. But as his perspective changed, he started noticing a bigger question. What happens when an entire society becomes dependent on making everything easier? Daniel began looking beyond his own habits. He noticed that convenience was not just changing individual choices. It was changing the way people interacted with the world around them. During a meeting at his company, Daniel watched his coworkers solve problems with incredible speed. Technology helped them complete tasks faster than ever before. Information was available instantly. Communication was effortless. Productivity had improved in ways previous generations could only imagine. But something felt different. People were finishing more tasks while feeling less connected to the work itself. They were moving faster, but they were not always thinking deeper. After the meeting, Daniel shared his thoughts with Sarah Mitchell. I used to believe every improvement was automatically a better choice, he said. But now I wonder if we sometimes trade something important without noticing. Sarah nodded. Every tool changes the person who uses it. The question is whether we are choosing that change or simply accepting it. Daniel thought about her words. He realized that convenience often arrived quietly. It rarely felt like a major decision. It appeared as a small choice repeated every day. Choose the faster option. Choose the easier method. Choose the path with less effort. Over time, those choices shaped habits, and habits shaped lives. Daniel began researching how people adapted to modern convenience. He noticed a pattern. When a new technology removed a difficult task, people celebrated the saved time. But they rarely asked what skills, experiences, or connections disappeared along with that task. He thought about simple things from the past. Writing a letter required patience, but it created a meaningful connection. Learning a skill took longer, but the process created confidence. Traveling without knowing every detail created unexpected memories. The challenge was not the enemy. Sometimes the challenge was the reason the experience mattered. One weekend, Daniel visited Sarah's classroom during a community learning event. He watched children working together on a project. They made mistakes. They tried different ideas. They asked questions. Nobody immediately searched for the fastest answer. They were learning through the process itself. Daniel realized adults often forgot this lesson. In the search for efficiency, they sometimes removed the very experiences that helped them grow. That evening, Daniel wrote a note to himself. The goal is not to make life effortless. The goal is to make life meaningful. He understood that convenience was not something to reject. It had improved healthcare, communication, transportation, and countless parts of daily life. The problem began when people stopped choosing and started depending. Convenience was supposed to be a tool that supported human life, not a replacement for human experience. As Daniel continued changing his habits, he discovered something unexpected. The moments that required attention, patience, and effort were often the moments that stayed with him longest. He was not going backward. He was learning how to move forward with awareness. And for the first time, he understood that the easiest path was not always the path that created the richest life. Daniel Carter thought he had already learned the biggest lesson about convenience. He believed he understood that easier was not always better, and that some effort was necessary for a meaningful life. But then something happened that tested everything he had discovered. One ordinary morning, Daniel woke up expecting his usual routine. He reached for his phone, ready to check his schedule, order breakfast, and begin another carefully planned day. But the services he depended on were suddenly unavailable. A temporary technology issue affected several platforms he used every day. There was no instant delivery, no automated reminders, no quick solutions waiting at the touch of a screen. At first, Daniel felt frustrated. He realized how many small parts of his life depended on systems he rarely thought about. He could not immediately access information the way he usually did. He had to solve simple problems without relying on automatic answers. Tasks that once required almost no effort suddenly require patience and attention. But as the day continued, something unexpected happened. Daniel began noticing things he had been missing. Instead of ordering breakfast, He walked to a nearby cafe he had passed many times but never entered. He spoke with the owner, learned a little about the neighborhood, and enjoyed a conversation that would never have happened through an app. Later, instead of filling every quiet moment with entertainment, he sat outside and watched people move through the city. He realized how rarely he allowed himself to simply observe. The experience reminded him of something Sarah Mitchell had said before. Sometimes we remove the moments that make life feel alive, because we are too focused on making life easier. Daniel finally understood the difference between convenience and dependence. Convenience was helpful when it supported his choices, but dependence became a problem when he lost the ability to function without it. He thought about how many skills people slowly gave away because technology could perform them faster. People did not forget because they were incapable. They forgot because they no longer needed to practice. That realization changed the way Daniel viewed progress. Progress was not about removing every challenge. It was about creating better possibilities while still protecting the human experiences that mattered. That evening, Daniel called Sarah and shared what happened. "I always thought losing convenience would make life harder," he said. "But I actually noticed more things today than I usually do." Sarah smiled. Maybe the problem was never convenience itself. Maybe the problem was that we stopped noticing what it replaced. Daniel looked around his apartment. The same devices were still there. The same technology was still available. Nothing about the outside world had changed. The only difference was his awareness. He no longer saw convenience as a shortcut to happiness. He saw it as a tool that required responsibility. The following weeks became an experiment for Daniel. He continued using technology, but he became more intentional. He asked himself whether a shortcut was truly helping him, or simply removing an experience he might value. He discovered that some tasks were worth doing slowly. Some conversations were worth having in person. Some moments were worth waiting for. Daniel had spent years trying to save time. Now he was learning something more important: how to spend it well. After the unexpected day without his usual digital comforts, Daniel Carter expected to return to his previous routine. But instead of forgetting the experience, he found himself carrying the lesson into every part of his life. He began asking a question he had never considered before. Is this making my life better? Or is it simply making my life easier? The difference seemed small, but Daniel realized it changed everything. Before, he measured progress by how quickly something could be completed. Now, he started measuring it by what the experience allowed him to gain. At work, Daniel noticed a change in the way he approached problems. He still used technology to organize information and improve efficiency, but he stopped searching for the fastest answer immediately. Sometimes he allowed himself to think through a challenge before looking for a shortcut. He discovered that the process of solving a problem often taught him something valuable. The answer was not always the most important part. The journey toward finding it mattered too. His coworkers noticed the difference. Daniel, who was once known for always rushing toward the next task, began spending more time listening during meetings. He asked better questions. He encouraged his team to share ideas instead of immediately searching for the quickest solution. The change did not make him less productive. In many ways, it made his work more meaningful. One afternoon, Daniel met Sarah at the same community center where their conversation had first changed his perspective. They watched people gathering together, sharing stories and helping one another. "You seem different," Sarah said. Daniel smiled. "I think I finally understand what you meant. Convenience is not the problem. Forgetting what matters is the problem." Sarah nodded. "That is the balance most people are trying to find." Daniel thought about how many people viewed technology as either a solution or a threat. But he realized the truth was somewhere in between. Technology could create incredible opportunities. It could save time, connect people, and solve problems that once seemed impossible. But humans still had to decide what they wanted to do with those opportunities. Saving time only mattered if people used that time for something meaningful. Over the next few months, Daniel continued building a more intentional lifestyle. He still used online services. He still appreciated the convenience available to him. But he also protected moments that could not be automated. He made time for conversations without distractions. He explored places without planning every detail. He learned new skills instead of always searching for someone else to do things for him. He discovered that effort was not always a burden. Sometimes effort was the thing that made a moment memorable. Looking back at the person he used to be, Daniel did not feel regret. He understood why he loved convenience. Everyone wants life to feel easier. Everyone wants more time and fewer obstacles. The mistake was believing that removing every challenge would automatically create a better life. Some challenges create confidence. Some waiting creates appreciation. Some effort creates connection. Daniel's journey was not about rejecting the modern world. It was about becoming more aware of how he lived inside it. He finally understood that convenience should be a servant, not a master. The best technology does not replace the human experience. It gives people more opportunities to choose what truly matters. And sometimes the most meaningful moments are not the ones that happen instantly. They are the ones we take the time to experience. Daniel Carter had spent years believing that a better life was built by removing every unnecessary difficulty. If something took too long, he searched for a faster way. If something required too much effort, he looked for a simpler solution. But after months of reflection, he discovered a different perspective. A meaningful life was not created by avoiding every challenge. It was created by choosing which challenges were worth experiencing. This realization changed the way Daniel looked at the world around him. He began noticing that many people were asking the same question without realizing it. They wanted more time, more freedom, and more comfort. But when they finally received those things, they often filled the extra space with even more tasks, more distractions, and more demands. Daniel recognized that saving time was only valuable if people knew what to do with that time. One morning, Daniel visited a small neighborhood park before starting work. In the past, he would have considered this impossible. His schedule was always full. Every minute had a purpose. But now, he allowed himself moments without a specific goal. He watched people walking, families spending time together, and neighbors having simple conversations. Nothing about the scene was extraordinary. Yet Daniel realized these ordinary moments were the ones people often missed while chasing efficiency. Later that week, Daniel shared his thoughts with his team at work. He explained that technology had transformed the way they worked, but they needed to be careful not to confuse speed with success. A faster answer is not always a better answer, he told them. Sometimes the time we spend thinking, creating, and understanding is where the real value comes from. His team began experimenting with a new approach. They used technology to reduce unnecessary tasks, but they protected time for creativity and collaboration. The results surprised everyone. They were not only completing projects effectively, but they were also enjoying the process more. Daniel realized that the goal was never to return to a slower world. The goal was to create a smarter relationship with convenience. He thought about Sarah's words from months earlier. Convenience was a tool. Like any tool, its value depended on how people used it. A tool could support human ability, but it could never replace human purpose. Daniel continued building habits that reminded him to stay present. He cooked meals with friends instead of always choosing the quickest option. He explored his city without planning every second. He learned new skills even when he knew someone else could complete the task faster. These choices did not make his life less efficient. They made his life feel fuller. Over time, Daniel noticed something important. The moments he remembered most were rarely the moments that required the least effort. They were the moments when he was fully involved. The conversation that lasted longer than expected. The project that required patience. The experience that taught him something new. Daniel finally understood that convenience was never meant to remove life from living. It was meant to create space for more of it. The challenge was not finding ways to make everything easier. The challenge was deciding what was worth the effort. Months after changing the way he viewed convenience, Daniel Carter noticed something unexpected. The biggest transformation was not in the technology he used or the habits he changed. It was in the way he paid attention. He began seeing choices that once seemed invisible. Every day, people made hundreds of decisions about how they spent their time, where they placed their focus, and what they considered valuable. Daniel realized that modern life was not simply about having more options. It was about learning how to choose wisely among those options. One evening, Daniel and Sarah Mitchell sat together at a small cafe in their neighborhood. They watched people walking through the busy streets of New York City, each person carrying their own schedule, responsibilities, and goals. Daniel looked around and said, "I think many of us believe we are searching for more time. But maybe we are actually searching for more meaningful moments. Sarah smiled because she knew Daniel had reached the understanding she had been trying to share from the beginning. The conversation moved beyond technology and convenience. They talked about how people often measured success by speed and productivity. Finishing more tasks became a symbol of achievement. Being constantly available became a sign of importance. But Daniel had learned that a full calendar did not always mean a fulfilling life. He remembered the years when he had every tool designed to save time, yet he rarely felt like he had enough of it. The problem was not the lack of time. The problem was that he had not been intentional about how he used it. Daniel began sharing his experience with others, not as someone who had discovered a perfect solution, but as someone who had learned to ask better questions. He explained that convenience was one of humanity's greatest achievements. It allowed people to connect across distances, access information, and solve problems more efficiently than ever before. The goal was not to reject progress. The goal was to make sure progress continued serving human values. During a small community discussion, someone asked Daniel, "How do we know when convenience has gone too far?" Daniel paused before answering. Maybe we should ask ourselves whether something is helping us live better, or simply helping us avoid effort. The room became quiet as people considered the question. Everyone had examples from their own lives. Moments when they chose the easiest option and later wondered what they had missed. Times when they were so focused on saving minutes that they overlooked the experience happening around them. Daniel understood that convenience was not the enemy of a meaningful life. It was simply a powerful tool that required awareness. A person could use technology to create more opportunities for connection, creativity, and growth. But without intention, the same tools could slowly remove the moments that made life feel personal. Looking back, Daniel realized his journey had never been about giving up comfort. It was about rediscovering choice. The modern world would continue becoming faster and more convenient. That progress was not something to fear. But every person still had a responsibility to decide what should remain human, personal, and meaningful. Because a life filled with easier choices was not automatically a better life. A better life was one where people still had the freedom to choose what truly mattered. Years after Daniel Carter began questioning the role of convenience in his life, he looked back and realized the biggest change was not the technology around him. The biggest change was the relationship he had with his own choices. The world had not slowed down. In fact, everything around him continued becoming faster, smarter, and more connected. New tools appeared every day, promising to save more time and remove more effort. But Daniel no longer saw convenience as a destination. He saw it as a tool that needed direction. He remembered the person he used to be. Someone who believed that the perfect life was one where every obstacle disappeared. Someone who measured success by how quickly he could complete tasks, and how efficiently he could organize every moment. At the time he thought he was creating freedom. Now he understood that freedom was not simply having fewer responsibilities. Freedom was having the awareness to decide what deserved his attention. Daniel continued using technology in his work and personal life. He still enjoyed the benefits of modern innovation. He appreciated the ability to communicate instantly, access information, and complete tasks that once required much more time. But he also protected certain parts of life from becoming completely automated. He made time for conversations without distractions. He allowed himself to learn things slowly. He accepted that some experiences were valuable precisely because they could not be rushed. One afternoon, Daniel returned to the community center where his journey had started. He watched people gathering together, sharing ideas, and creating connections that could not be measured by speed or efficiency. He thought about how easy it was for people to chase improvement without asking what improvement truly meant. A faster life was not always a richer life. A simpler process was not always a more meaningful experience. Daniel realized that humanity had always searched for ways to make life easier. That desire was natural. It came from creativity, curiosity, and the wish to solve problems. The mistake was not creating convenience. The mistake was forgetting that life was made of more than completed tasks and saved minutes. The most important moments were often the ones that required presence. A conversation that took longer than expected. A skill that required practice. A journey that included unexpected turns. A challenge that revealed something about who a person could become. Daniel shared this lesson whenever people asked about his experience. He never told them to abandon technology or avoid convenience. Instead, he encouraged them to pause and think. Before choosing the easiest option, ask what that choice might replace. Before saving time, ask how that time will be used. Before removing difficulty, ask whether the difficulty might be part of the value, because the future would continue offering more convenience. That was not something to fear. The real question was whether people would remain intentional enough to use it wisely. Daniel finally understood that a better life was not created by eliminating every challenge. It was created by choosing which moments were worth the effort. Convenience could open doors, but humans still had to decide where to walk. And in a world designed to make everything easier, the greatest skill might be remembering what should never be made meaningless.